In this video, I will show you how to add another agent or another broker to your listing agreement or your purchase agreement or an escrow that's already underway. Now we'll start by looking at a listing agreement. Here I have a listing agreement up. We're on page 6 of 6 and we're down at the bottom in the signature section. And you'll see there's a single brokerage name, but there are two lines for the agents. And this is intended for co-listing agents that are part of the same brokerage. Now, if there's a co-listing agent that's part of another brokerage, so there are two co-listing brokerages, you'll check this box here to incorporate the additional broker acknowledgement, CAR form ABA. Now, sometimes I see agents and they'll go up to page 1 on the listing agreement and they'll put two brokerages here, and that'll be reflected at the bottom where we just saw. And you'll see two brokerage names here, and then two different agents for two different brokerages sign. And that's technically incorrect. I mean, it's fine if it gets done, but it doesn't exclude or preclude the fact that the agent needs to check this box and do the additional broker acknowledgement. This form's designed for there to be one agent with a single brokerage to fill it out, take the lead on it, even if there's a co-listing broker, and then check this box here to incorporate the additional broker acknowledgement. That's how it's designed. It's not designed to have two brokerage names on it. Now, on the purchase agreement, same idea on the signature page here. We're on page 16 of 16, and you'll see buyer's brokerage. Now, of course, co-listing brokers are far more common than co-buyer brokers, but co-buyer brokers happens as well. And you have two lines for two agents working in the same office under the same brokerage, and they can both sign here. Now, if there is an additional agent that wasn't mentioned here that is part of the transaction, check this box and you can incorporate the additional agent acknowledgement. But if there's another brokerage, another brokerage representing the buyer, so two agents, two different brokerages, but they're both representing the buyer, then you check this box here and you're adding that same form we added off the listing agreement, the additional broker acknowledgement. All right. And you can do the same, by the way. If you're acknowledging that there are two brokerages you see in the MLS when you're writing an offer, you're a buyer's agent writing an offer, there are two listing brokers mentioned on the MLS, you can check this box down here and acknowledge it so it incorporates the additional broker acknowledgement. Now let me jump over to the additional agent acknowledgement real quick. Now, as you saw, if those two lines don't fit all the agents that are going to be in the transaction, you can use this form. Or if you are adding an agent, maybe a co-buyer's agent to an escrow that's already underway and it wasn't written in the purchase agreement, you can use this form to add another agent in the same office. And this form is pretty straightforward. By default, it's an addendum to the purchase agreement. Of course, you can change that. And you can put in the property address and the names of the parties and specify if this agent's going to be working with the seller or the buyer, and the brokerage name and the agent or agents that are going to be added onto the transaction, and then everyone signs to acknowledge. Pretty simple. Now, the additional broker acknowledgement is not quite as simple, but still one page, fairly easy, so we'll go through it. Now, it starts with the listing agreement by default because co-listing brokers are far more common than co-buyer brokers. But of course, you can have co-buyer brokers. You check this box here. Or buyer representation agreement, which is actually probably the least common scenario. You check that box there, or even write other. And then you can put between the parties, if applicable, of course. I mean, you're not going to have two different parties if you're doing a buyer representation agreement. And then the property, which, of course, if applicable, but you may not have a property address if you're doing a buyer representation agreement. But if it's a listing or purchase agreement, yes, you're going to have an address. Now, that's pretty simple. That's straightforward, right? You're just filling out a questionnaire. Here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. So I have some information filled in the listing agreement because that is the more common scenario, but it's the same for the buyer representation agreement. A little bit different down here for the purchase agreement. Now we specify the two different brokerages involved in the transaction. Pretty simple. Then we come down here and it identifies the co-listing brokers agree to share two things: responsibility, so duties, and compensation for the representation of the seller as follows. Now, so at a minimum, you're going to want to put something on line 1A, a compensation breakdown, because clearly it's important that you and another brokerage, now consider that with another brokerage, an outside brokerage, you're engaging in a business partnership. And a business partnership should have as much of their relationship and expectations in writing as possible. Of course, compensation being the most important, you're going to want to write it out explicitly what the split is. Now, sometimes I see this form, I should say often I'll see it, where it'll say 50-50 or commission or compensation to be split equally, something to that effect. And that's fine. And there may be not a 50-50 arrangement. So I wrote out something like 60% of compensation to broker 1 and 40% to broker 2. Now, this is an absolute minimum because this is actually quite complicated if you really think about it. So what duties? Now, I guess if you think about it where both parties, both brokerages, are each doing an equal amount of work, shared responsibility, shared duties, shared expenses, then you could write something, all compensation and expenses, all compensation, responsibilities, and expenses to be shared equally between brokers. That would cover it. Now, of course, I don't like how vague that is, but you could say something along the lines of compensation, responsibility, duties, and expenses to be split equally or split 50-50 between brokerages. The problem that I see arise from this form is that people don't specify who has to do what. Who's paying for whose sign gets installed? Who's paying for sign installation? Who's holding the open house? Who's paying the photographer? So and is the expense for the photographer recouped by the other agent if the listing expires? I mean, there are all these questions. So ideally, you'll have more specific terms than just something here. But as a minimum, put something on 1A. Now, 1B is a little weird. It says equally and jointly share responsibility. Okay. I don't like how it doesn't say compensation. I mean, responsibility itself is kind of vague, but we move on. Or what? Or so if you check this box, none of this? Or is this supposed to be part of this? This isn't clear in terms of what this is. This part of A? If so, why is it on B? And if you check or, it basically eliminates what precedes it. So 1B is worthless. This is a worthless line. This should be ignored entirely. 1B is no good. Instead, you'll want to go down to 1C, on the terms of the attached agreement. And that, in my opinion, is best because you can do something like an agent commission sharing agreement, write this out, or, so you have, expenses, compensation, everything's written out in this thing, in this form. And this tutorial will be on a separate video, but it's car form ACS if you want to look it up. All right. Ideally, you're going to have something more comprehensive. So you check this box and do that ACS form. Or you check this box and you go to a Word document and you write out everything you can think of. Broker 1 is getting 50% of the commission. Broker 2 is getting 50% of the commission. Broker 1 is fielding all calls, doing all field work. Broker 2 is doing all paperwork. I mean, however you envision the entire process and how things can go wrong should be written out. The ACS form, that basically covers it for you with boilerplate verbiage. Now, again, at the very least, put this in, put something up on 1A and just ignore 1B. Now, you have the same options under the buyer representation agreement, which probably is extremely rarely, if ever, used. So we'll skip down to purchase agreement. This is a little bit different how it looks. You have a scenario. Now, if you're writing an offer and you recognize that there are multiple listing brokers, maybe you see it in the MLS, you can check this box and write this in. Now, it's a little weird how in which they have agreed to share responsibility and compensation. Okay, I mean, it's a little weird for a buyer's agent to write something down and state that, but I guess it's acknowledging that they should have figured it out by this point in time. But if you're a buyer's agent that has another co-broker involved, so another agent, another brokerage is representing the buyer with you, you're sharing that buyer, you'll check this box. You'll put in the names of the brokers, just like we did up here for the listing agreement. So you have broker 1 and broker 2. What's a little weird is they don't have the same options up here. I mean, this whole thing is poorly written, quite frankly. But even down here, they don't even have those options that you can modify. Instead, they say they've entered into an agreement. Okay, what agreement? I mean, it's not really shown. So I would say incorporate that ACS form, okay? Or write it out on a document. Write out which responsibilities, which duties go to whom, and how is the compensation split, okay? So fairly simple stuff. I hope I'm not belaboring the point, but this is one of those things where, look, this is a one-page document, right? Pretty simple stuff, but if it goes wrong, it is a massive, massive headache, huge headache, because you're engaging with an outside company, and if things go wrong, it can escalate and turn into hours and hours of emails and possibly a legal resolution that's costly and time consuming. All right. Now, if there are a bunch of agents that are all, so let me back up. Line 4 are, who are the agents for these brokerages? Okay, you have the brokerage names, but these are the agents, the representatives of the brokerage, and then the representative of the client. So it's written out here, license number there, pretty simple stuff. If there are other agents, let's say Allison agent has a team and she has two other agents. It's whole teams of agents everywhere, just teams of agents. Well, you can check this box and you can do the additional agent acknowledgement we talked about earlier. And then everyone acknowledges it here and it's done. That's the additional broker acknowledgement. Now, anytime you work with another agent, I think it's wise to use the agent commission sharing agreement. And it's the ACS, and there'll be a separate tutorial on that. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Thanks for watching.